Chapter 1, Lesson 5, and we want to look at another property of mathematics called the distributive property. Now, the distributive property sounds like the word distribute, and if you think about that, it might help us as we move forward into the understanding of this property. When you distribute something, you pass it out, and when you're talking about a group of people, you make sure that everybody in the group gets the item, whatever it is you're passing it out, whether it be money, passing out money, candy, passing out a test or quiz or whatever. When I pass that out, I distribute that, and everyone in the group, everyone in the class, gets the same number of whatever it is I'm passing out. So the distributive property is kind of like that in a mathematical sense. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So let's take a look then at the distributive property. If we read this sentence, it says a use for the distributive property is to multiply, so it's a multiplication problem, multiply a sum, which is an addition problem, or a difference, which is a subtraction problem, by a number. So we're going to take an addition problem and we're going to multiply it by a single number, or a subtraction problem and multiply it by a single number. And we see that represented here. We have an addition problem on the inside of this parentheses, and we have this A on the outside next to the parentheses. Remember we talked about using multiplication early this year and the symbols we want to use, and we're using parentheses next to each other to indicate multiplication? Well, that's what we have here, and it's very important that you notice that there's no sign, there's no operation sign in between the A and this parentheses. So that means I multiply the A times the parentheses. Well, how do I do that? Well, I do that by distributing or giving everything in the parentheses the letter A through multiplication. So I multiply the B by the letter A, and I multiply the C by the letter A, and what I've done is I've distributed this number that's on the outside to everything that's in the parentheses. Now, it doesn't matter how many terms you have in the parentheses. We have 2 here. You could have 3, you could have 5, it doesn't matter. Everything that's in the parentheses has this number that's on the outside distributed to it, because this is A times the entire parentheses. So everything in the parentheses gets an A. It's kind of like we talked about exponents and being careful to notice that the exponent applies to whatever symbol it's next to, and when it was next to a parentheses, the whole parentheses got multiplied by itself over and over. Well, here the A is next to the parentheses, so everything inside the parentheses gets the letter A multiplied to it, and it doesn't matter how many terms are in there. So you can have this A in front of a addition problem, you can have the A in front of a subtraction problem, but you still do the same thing. You distribute the A to each term inside the parentheses. Now you'll notice over here that the A is on the other side. Now why can we do that? Well, what do we do in that situation? You remember the commutative property. We can change the order of the multiplication. Here I have A times the parentheses. Here I have the parentheses times A, and its commutative multiplication is, therefore it doesn't change. I still can distribute the A to each term inside the parentheses and not change it. So you're going to see the number or letter sometimes in the front. You're going to need see the letter sometimes in the back, but it doesn't matter. It's multiplication. It's A next to a parentheses, which means multiplication. And so you still distribute the A to each term. All right, so I got a couple of sentences here that kind of wrap up what I was just talking about there. What we do with the distributive property is we take the value that's outside and next to the parentheses, and it needs to be multiplied by each term in the quantity. Okay, so everybody inside the parentheses has that operation, has that number multiplied to it. And we can do that whether the operation inside is addition or subtraction. And because multiplication is commutative, we may see the number in front of the parentheses, we may see the number on the after the parentheses. Multiplication is commutative, so it doesn't matter. Now I want to make one final point here before we end this video, and that is this. Is that the distributive property is the only mathematical way that I can remove a parenthesis from an expression. If you think about what you've been doing this year, when we've had parentheses to indicate multiplication, when we actually do the multiplication, what happens to the parentheses? Well, they go away because they indicated the operation. We did the operation, so they go away. And the distributive property is going to be the only way that you can remove parentheses from an expression. So it's a very important note, and it's a very important thing to understand. Okay, we cannot remove parentheses any other way. Now, using the associative property, we can change where the parentheses are in the expression. We can associate different things that we did in the last lesson, but the parentheses are still there. To get rid of the parentheses, you're going to have to distribute a number somewhere along the line. And I'll just give that to you now. Keep that in your mind. I'll come back to that over and over again, but I wanted to introduce that now when we're looking at the distributive property.